Hello, this is an episode of the Coach Support Show, but unfortunately, we had a few technical issues and poor use of OBS from my side. So, for the first hour of this discussion, you couldn't hear my guest. So, it's just me talking. What I've done, because I did end up talking a lot in this episode, is I've still included that footage, but I put it afterwards. So what you're going to see now is actually an hour into the show where we still have 45 or so minutes left. Then you'll see the last 45 minutes with both of us where we do try and cover a bunch of the same things that we discussed in that first hour. But if you want to keep watching the rest, it will continue and play afterwards. So I hope you enjoy. It was still an incredibly interesting discussion from my side of things. We talked about boot camps and we talked about how to approach best of series in League of Legends. So enjoy. Okay. So
I mean, I don't think there wasn't much. It's just been great listening to you today. So I
well,
mean,
we've been going for an hour, so I'm sure there was quite a lot that you were saying as well.
I think I dropped some. I think I bounced back what you were saying in terms of how it might be looked at from the scientific research and sports psychology.
Yeah.
So yeah, using terms like collective efficacy and identity leadership and all these other highly.
Whoever asked Tamas and Freddie to reach out to me, those are the people who finally got through to me. So thank you very much for that.
Applaud them.
I'm not really sure what to do. I think we have to just carry on.
Yeah.
Well, we can do like a brief. What we'll do is we'll do. Well, if you can just give me your thoughts on all these sections, then. So we talked about them now, but we'll get to the looking ahead in a bit. But your thoughts, now on this idea of like, firstly the self-reflection one, because that's the one that already you've got like more experience in than me, and so what do you think about this as an idea, and even actually this specific way of talking about it?
Let me just word for word recite everything that I said, then you can cut it into the bits where I was
True.
muted. What do I think? Well, to recap, right? So some of this looking in, looking out, looking around, looking ahead exercise. Let's apply it to the boot camp. I think the idea of maybe starting, let's say you had a 4-day boot camp and you started every day with a different one of these exercises, starting with looking around to develop an awareness of who's in your team, who are they as individuals, the feeling that they know you and your strengths and what you're about, and that building that deeper connection with other people, and just a wonderful opportunity that is offered through coming together as an esports team to do that kind of stuff. I think that's really, really cool. So firstly, just as a simple to grasp but huge upside exercise, I think what a wonderful thing to do. Very catchy, love the alliteration. So the 4 L's there. Also your hero, highlight, hardship. It's nice to have those points of alliteration. It's cool. Looking in, so looking out, knowing the org, knowing what other competencies, skills, personalities are in the organization is really, really cool and can actually strengthen your sense of belonging to something strong and impressive and positive. That building that deeper connection with other people, and just a wonderful opportunity that is offered through coming together as an esports team to do that kind of stuff. I think that's really, really cool. So firstly, just as a simple to grasp but huge upside exercise, I think what a wonderful thing to do. Very catchy, love the alliteration. So the 4 L's there. Also your hero, highlight, hardship. It's nice to have those points of alliteration. It's cool. Looking in, so looking out, knowing the org, knowing what other competencies, skills, personalities are in the organization is really, really cool and can actually strengthen your sense of belonging to something strong and impressive and positive. That's only a good thing.
That actually, I forgot to mention that. That's actually a lot of where it comes from. That thing of belonging, the Owen Eastwood idea, and I think we also can build those connections across different teams. So if you're in a massive organization, and we're doing League of Legends, right? I want us to be happy that the CS team just won.
Yes.
and those kind of things. I think that's really, really good. One thing as well that I think organizations should do, when Owen Eastwood worked with Stuart Lancaster at England Rugby, they they made a video called something like This Is England. And it was about the history of the team, how important it is to the people, and what's come before. Or the All Blacks have the little black book
Yeah,
where they have all their like past teams, and it's all about this idea of leaving the jersey in a better place than you found it, which I think is fantastic.
and hopefully washed.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, self-reflection. So looking in. I mean, I obviously I love it. I think we really it it's not something we're particularly encouraged to do from an early age. Is actually take a moment to really think about your thinking and think about what's been going on and what you're about and what you're doing. I think self-reflection is a valuable source of learning. I think for coaches, it's, as we've discussed, something really important to think about, because if you look back at what you've been doing, you might double down on it and think it's great and it is in tune with who I am and who I want to be and what I think is the best way of operating. But it could well be that you start to understand when things aren't exactly as you wanted them to be. You might understand why, and you might understand how much control and room you have to change them in future. So I think self-reflection is a wonderful thing to do. Um, I think in terms of like at a boot camp specifically, it's probably just another mechanism for a unique experience, a special experience, and an opportunity to share things, perhaps, because you could build it into the boot camp schedule to have a moment where everyone reflects on their own performance in some way and maybe feels comfortable enough to share an aspect of it
Mm,
that maybe was something they want to work on, or yeah, something they want to improve.
mm,
And you can in that social setting, you can connect that to how can you get help within the group to do that, to achieve that thing, which is
mm,
making that connection to others is always quite strong. So
mm. And could you even do it about stuff that's gone on in the boot camp? About these other exercises, like how was it to find out this much about
yes,
your teammates and that kind of thing?
yeah, I mean, that's good practice for if you're ever running a workshop. It's really good practice to have the reflection on exactly what's just happened, partly because your memory of it will be as sharp as it is ever going to be. It's only going to degrade. So being able to reflect on that and just getting used to vocalizing how my experience was and doing that in front of other people. What a great skill to develop for an esports team, because you're going to have to do that after every scrim anyway, in some sense. So yeah, I think all for it, all for it, absolutely. And it gives you another, I think maybe we'll get on to how I might approach a boot camp,
Mm.
but it gives you another activity to introduce that will eat up some time that's not gaming.
Okay.
And yeah, I think of course we have to scrim and we have to play a high volume of games to be good. But at that boot camp, I think you're pulled in two directions. One is we want to get better at the game and we want to embrace playing together and develop in-game skill. We also want to make use of our time outside of the game to develop bonds and cohesion and things like that. But there's a middle ground where, like, can we do something outside of playing the game that relates to the game? And that's, I think, in esports, I think that's super difficult, because you could sit down away from a screen and talk about a strategy, but it's actually kind of much better to watch a game where that strategy is being played out. And so a reflection is still very much connected to maybe an experience. It could be connected to a game. It could be connected to some drill that you've done, but it's not time on PC. And I think that's quite healthy. So
Mm. Okay.
yeah,
Then the last one we've got over from my side is the looking ahead. And then, like I
yes,
say, there's like philosophy about the game, but I won't go into that too much. That's the same as we did in the very first pre-scrim with Nord. We would just take more time to do that same thing and wouldn't lead straight from that into games. So working out the kind of team we want to be.
mhm,
But yeah, looking ahead is the part where it's like building rules for the future. And this is the part that I think a lot of teams do without doing the other stuff. And I think in a sense, this is the one that's the most, I don't think it's the most important actually, but it is the one that's the most obvious that we've done. because now we've got a bunch of values that we all agree on, and we've got a bunch of behaviors that hopefully we've got a bunch of behaviors that show those values, and so on. So my personal way of doing it, which hasn't changed from when you probably saw us doing it, I think for me, I like to start as deep as possible. I like to start talking what I would say about like the philosophy of performance. So I love a good quote. I collect them, and so I have a page now. It's like pages and pages, and so I can't. I used to have all the ones that I liked. I would bring to these exercises, and now like there's no chance. We would just be there forever. So I select a bunch of quotes, maybe 10, let's say, and I ask also the players to bring them. I would if I had time for this. I didn't. And we just put them around the room, and we go around with post-it notes, and I want to know what it means to you, the quote, like literally what it means, and what does it mean in a high performance context, and also like, do you agree, disagree, think it's stupid, or think it's fantastic? And we start by talking about that, and we talk about each one in turn, to show that it's not quite as simple as people might think, where you'd have, here's some good things to agree to do, and here's some bad things to agree to do. And also there's very different approaches. So finding some quotes about that could hopefully illustrate those different approaches. So that for me is the first stage where we talk about that. And we select ones that are important, and we try and move that discussion, or I gradually move that discussion from the quotes to more the values that the quotes are showing. And so we come to the values from that way. We don't say, okay, what are the most important values for you in a team? Because you end up with all the same answers almost always. And they're often not answers that are real. They're answers that we think we should say. So we should all respect each other and all this kind of thing, which might well be super important, and you might end up in the same place, but it's worth going through that, going through that mess to get there first.
Yeah, definitely. I remember at Solaria you had the quotes in the four corners of the room, and I think everyone had to go around and they had to write down what that meant to them and the values that they associate with those quotes. And then there was a sort of collating exercise at the end of that, which was, I can't remember what the four quotes were. I think one of them was from Henry Ford.
No, I don't think so.
Oh, one was an
The
American
ones that
president.
I've got before were, there is no effort without error or shortcoming, Theodore
Okay,
Roosevelt. So
that's the one.
big one for me is that we have to be comfortable with mistakes. And the really interesting thing with starting with this quote is that people come back with stuff like, oh, you either win or you learn, and like, we'll learn a lot from losing. And like, this doesn't say any about that. It just says there is no effort without error. Like, you can't try and do anything without making mistakes. And that's an important first step before you say, okay, now we'll learn something from mistakes or anything like that. That's a really, really important first step for me. So it's about, I don't know, learner safety or any technical term you want to use for it. But it's about this idea that we have to create an environment where we feel comfortable making mistakes. And so few teams that I've ever been on, I would actually describe in that way, if any. And the biggest way you see it, and the biggest way it actually shows in behavior, is people don't suggest plays or champions, or they don't say something because they think, if I'm wrong, people are going to say like, oh no, that's horrible, that's just a terrible pick. And so they don't suggest it. And so no one suggests it. And so we just miss this important thing, that maybe it was useless, but also maybe it's not useless. And then thirdly, maybe it inspires someone else to think of something which is great.
Yeah.
So to kill those ideas and to not really be thinking is so common. And that's why, the best way to avoid mistakes is you just copy the better teams. And that's why when Chovy plays something, suddenly everyone plays that same champion, because it's the safest way to play. And I think for high performance, you have to ignore that.
Yeah. Well, absolutely. I think we've covered this in a previous podcast as well, but the exceptional performance requires doing exceptional things, and if it's exceptional, it's not the norm. So how do you find them? Well, variety in activities and experiences, I think, would be one.
Yeah.
Yeah, magic. It's interesting that people jump to the losing
Yeah.
as losing as learning rather than
Yeah.
you can perform an outcome, achieve success with it, but you could always maybe achieve a higher degree of success. But it doesn't mean
Mm.
it was bad. It just
Mm.
means I've learned, maybe I can see a new way of doing it, having had this experience. So it's
Mm.
interesting. Esports jumps to losing.
Yeah.
I've seen
Yeah.
it
Yeah.
myself.
But it is the thing that we do. We definitely jump to the losing side of it.
Yeah.
I mean that's one. I've got, like I say, I've got many more. I can do one. I'll do one more. We
Do
won't just
more.
go through my list. Even when I had four, it would have taken a while. But literally now I've got. If I can find them somewhere, yeah. Okay, I've got 3 full pages of quotes now from from all over. But another one that I really love is, "You might be wrong in believing that you can, but you've nothing to gain from believing that you can't." And I really love that one. And actually, I push that a bit further with people. So this is something that I don't really know where to attribute it to. I've actually just attributed it to the High Performance podcast. So they go through the lives of high performers, originally in sport. And over, you hear these stories of. So I think the first time I heard it was actually on that Sia Khaleesi episode, where he had to walk 8 miles a day every morning for water, and dreamed about playing rugby for South Africa, which was unbelievably rare. And he became the first black captain of the Springboks and won now
Mhm.
back-to-back World Cups. And like this is not a story that happens. And yet he will, was dreaming about it, and he believed in it, and he made it happen. And you hear all these stories all the time, and you hear these people talking about attraction theory, or I can't remember if that's the exact right word, or that kind of thing, like manifesting it.
Mm.
Um, and the downside is that's not how the world works, unfortunately. And it can seem like that from the outside, because you don't see the million people who dreamed of captaining their country to a World Cup win and didn't manage it. You just see the one person who did, and he happened to also believe it as well. Or the Conor McGregor thing of, I just wanted to be the champion, and then I was. It's like, yeah, the person who's
Mm.
second probably also wanted to be the champion too.
Exactly.
So what
Yeah.
are you going to do with that? And yet it just was happening over and over again. And so they started saying this phrase, yeah, you might be wrong in believing that you can, but you've just got nothing to gain. There's no upside to believing that you can't be the captain of your country and win the World Cup. And so for me, the other thing that I like to push a little bit is the believing thing, because I would say that I can't choose what I believe. If you put a gun to my head and say, "Do you believe you'll win EMEA Masters this year?" I would say no, because we're a no budget team who's streaming all our stuff versus teams who have got loads of budget and don't stream anything, so they can play against much stronger competition and have more time and all this kind of thing. But the way that I would phrase it is, you might be wrong in acting like you can, but you've nothing to gain from acting like you can't. So we should act like we're a team that can win, no matter what
Mhm.
competition that we're in. And if you're a Western team going to Worlds and you say you believe that you can win Worlds, I'll say, well, we understand believe, the word believe, in a slightly different way, because you shouldn't believe in something that's never happened. But you should go and act and treat yourself like a team that can win, not treat yourself like a team that can lose, if that really is your
Mm.
goal. So don't change your schedule because that's what the Eastern teams are doing, and we want as much practice against them as possible so that we'll be better next year. No, you're about performing now, like if that's the thing that you're going for. So
Yeah.
that one is really big for me, and making sure like the dream is bold enough to like pull ourselves forward,
Yes.
and that we can hold ourselves to that high standard no matter what people think of us. We just say, right, we're going to act like a team that can win whatever competition that we're in. And then you can say, okay, right, how does a team that would win EMEA Masters act? And then we can start to have some values based on that quote, and then we can
Yeah.
start to build some rules based on that value.
Yeah. Absolutely. It kind of reminds me a little bit of more contemporary thinking around goal setting as well. So, I mean, throw the SMART acronym out the window, because that is increasingly being seen as like nonsensical. Like, why do you need a SMART and a measurable goal? Surely a measurable goal. Sorry, why do you need a specific and a measurable goal? just because it fits in the acronym,
Yeah, because
or
otherwise marked.
yeah, exactly. But actually, it's being challenged because things like achievable don't fit with goal setting theory. So goal setting
Mm.
theory would say specific, but also very challenging goals
Yeah.
have improved performance. And
Yeah.
what's the point of setting a goal? It's not to achieve the goal, it's to improve in performance. So set yourself quite a ambitious goal, work towards it,
Mm.
shoot for the moon, fall along the
Well,
stars.
exactly.
Right?
Like we choose
So,
to do these things not because they're easy, but because they're hard.
oh,
That's literally what they said when they were shooting for the moon.
this is becoming a quote off. Yeah. So yeah, it sounds like there's something in there about the motivational impact
Mm.
effect of it. So
Yeah, yeah, definitely.
yeah, why not go for it? Why not have faith, but maybe don't believe it's your entitlement? But yeah,
Mm.
yeah, cool. Maybe just like there's a few things, plenty that has been said, but in the 10 minutes we've been live together, there was a few things about like boot camps that struck me, and uh, I've been part of a few team boot camps. That the most notable one, I won't mention the team, but I was with them on site, and I think it was a 3-day event in a nice facility, but there wasn't any, and there was a media component to it, so players were pulled out on occasions to go off and do their content, and there was a team. It was actually pre-season, so pre-split, so the team was to be announced, so they could do a fun announcement piece, and that was really kind of cool to be in the background. But I wasn't in the background; I was watching it being filmed. It was quite funny, and there was value in just in that exercise. Actually, having a bit of a skit they had to do, that was kind of a bit of a team bonding thing there. But my perception was actually the it felt so good to be going to this thing and have that in-person connection, and it felt, I think there was a bit of an assumption that things would just fall into place around a lot of scrimming and media. And by the way, Matt, performance coach, you'll be able to get a word in about what you want to do, right? And it just felt to me like there was a missed opportunity to do so much more, and in some ways also do so much less. So like I felt that there's a lot of hours when you're in person for a full day. There's a lot of hours there to play with, and just having the sort of mandatory team scrims and then just gaming together late into the night and ordering some food is like a bit of a lost opportunity there. And I felt there was time for more things. And yes, you could go down the sort of performance support, sports psychology route. You could do more of the physical activity. You could do the team bonding and sort of take people to a different environment to experience something and form connections, understanding about people in a different way that would be beneficial, we hope. But I think like having that planned in advance was important, having that program of expectation, and then having a few windows of time where you can do exercises like you've introduced, like the looking ahead, looking in, looking out, looking forward, or looking around, sorry, exercise. I think that's really important to program that in. And my sort of approach when it comes to working with teams, I think, is I pretty much universally would take a self-determination approach. So I want players and staff, but players tend not to get this so much, but I want players to have some voice and some choice over what they're doing. And I want them to have some responsibility. So I want them to have some uh, window of time where it's there, the stage is theirs, the mic is there, they have to take the floor, they have to do something with it. And that can be maybe providing opportunity for independent work and feeding it back. It could be the classics. It could be like review a game, review a champion, come back and present your findings. Or it can be lead an exercise or lead an activity. It could be funny, silly. It could be practical. But I think setting players up for success, so letting them know that we would like to do this at the bootcamp. Reason why. It's not just to connect with teammates, also to develop leadership skills, to see a different side of you. I think like planning that into the bootcamp is valuable, because it can be hard to do that in a purely online setting where you might not get a lot of feedback. You certainly won't. You will get much less non-verbal feedback, but you might not get any verbal feedback if it's just audio. So like doing that in person, I think, is really rich. So and it sort of sets a tone. Like everyone's got a role in this team. We can all decide to do things. We're all here to to contribute. So I think that's something I would fundamentally do. Yeah, and everything you said around identity leadership, for example, like being the prototype, being if you want people on time, be early. As the coach, it's a good place to do that. Wearing all the kit as much as possible, taking pride in the logo, taking pride in who you're representing. That's all part of building culture. I think that's all really really important stuff. Yeah,
I think from my point of view, whenever you're doing something, whenever you're thinking about a boot camp, the good thing about scrims is that they're easy to organize and easy to kind of fill up a day. And it can be a real danger of not having enough stuff. Normally, if people who are more inclined like me and you, we want to think about it, we're always fighting for more and more time. But it is really important that you can kind of justify each bit of time. And I think
yes,
that's why I like having these exercises like already ready. It's not something that I'm deciding for this year. It's something that I've thought about, and this is the exact way of doing it. Can flex, which allows us that flexibility to make it tailored to whoever we're doing it for.
yeah,
But what we're doing is quite different. So, I mean, I said this time, 3 of the 6 of us were married. The average age is like 20. Average age of the team is 27. So if you include me, it's older than that. And that's very uncommon. So it's going to be a very different experience, and the things that you value would be different. Or, like I said, this is probably the first boot camp where you had way more water than energy drinks. Like that's that's probably not a particularly common thing among esports players either. And that kind of thing. And Matt's going for a 10K run every day in the evenings after our session. So everything should be kind of flexible. But again, if we think about this previous experience in esports, the reason that there's always so much pushback is often because people have done exercises where they're like 2 hours to do something and then it's not been very useful. So it
yeah,
is something that's really important, I think. And we have to think about time in a slightly different way. So it's not 2 hours, it's if there's 10 of you, it's 20 hours of the team's time. So like, is this worth doing 20 hours?
yeah,
And a lot of them are absolutely, but it is worth like really fighting for each one of those things. And I would say the same thing about media. So if you have a long media day, if you have like a 9-hour media day scheduled, is it worth 90 hours if there's 10 people involved? Like the output, that starts to sound like an awful lot of hours and an awful lot of
yeah,
time and an awful lot of value for the organization that you really need to make sure you're getting a return on. So
yeah,
um,
yeah,
yes, it's something to always balance.
absolutely. Maybe a few other points on this. Like when I was looking into, of course, there's no research in esports on what is the best way to structure uh, a boot camp. The closest I could find was national team training camps in Olympic sports, and they often do some very cool things. There was a case study done down in Australia where over 2 years they had multiple national camps, and they took this very self-determination theory approach where they gave divisions of the team. It was actually an athletics team, so they weren't even necessarily needing each other for performance, but they would, like the relay team, for example, would do some things. But actually, they worked across as like an athletics division. They created work groups, and over the 2 years, the work groups had responsibilities for slightly different things, and they brought new ideas to the table. And there was like a work group, I think, for designing the team kit, even. So empowering athletes to do different things was interesting, but it didn't strictly apply, right? Because it's over such a long period of time. The other one was in medical settings. I didn't know this, but apparently there's a boot camp that's pretty standard as a final year of studying in medicine, maybe in America more so. Um, and they raise like some of the things they talk about that why that is so important is that the students get out there and they get to observe in practice maybe more senior doctors doing the work or surgeons doing the work. And that doesn't really apply because you in esports a league team. I don't know how much
Well,
observation in person
academies could do
is.
it. Like if your
True,
academy is remote and your main team is in the LEC, you bring them there for a week at the beginning.
true.
That can be quite an inspiring setting as well if you do it right. It can be
Yeah,
annoying if you do it wrong, but it could be great if you do it right.
yeah, true. So that actually the peer learning from observing the pro in practice could be huge. could be really impactful. You can imagine it's going to land with that academy player far more than being told in a Discord call to do this. So, yeah, great point. And then the only other caveat that they spoke about in a couple of these medical papers was just the idea of cognitive load. So, as we discussed at the beginning, as you discussed at the beginning of this podcast, you spoke about all the interference. So it's exhausting because there's new place, new location. If it's not, perfect, it's new location, not home comforts, not creature comforts, probably likelihood of tech problems or slight issues that need to be fixed, different food, that kind of stuff. Plus, if you then add to that long days of training and practice and personal time, all that kind of stuff, there's a lot, and that's going to interfere with learning. So if you take what you normally work on in a typical scrim block, what are your points that you take away, and what are your points of emphasis as the coach? Like halve that, if not take it down to even less, because the likelihood that people are going to take that as like learning for performance, are going to take that into future scrims or into future games, is probably decreased because of all the other stuff going on. So it was a nice point about just being conscious that I've seen this quite a lot, and it's one of my least, I don't want to criticize esports coaches too much, but it's like one of my least favorite parts of working in league is that after every game there are like 6 review points, and then the next game there's another 6 and they're completely different. And actually it's like, let's just have a couple of things that we take away, and we're all completely understanding why these are relevant and important, and we're going to really try and look for them and work on them in future. Like that's critical for the bootcamp, because there's going to be so many other competing thoughts and experiences. So I thought that was interesting.
Yeah, I think there's so much to be done and so many things to balance. But the main thing for me, just for anyone listening to this, and we didn't do this well enough, is getting on the same page of exactly what you want the outcome to be from the bootcamp.
Yeah.
And so as it came out afterwards, when we were talking about it, it was because, well, the last time they'd done a boot camp, the coaches were saying, no, we need more game time. We need to be scrimming in the evenings and the mornings as well. And all this kind of stuff. And so it's just completely the different approach. So you need to be clear about exactly what you want to have come out of these
Right.
things when you do them. Like I say, for me, I think it's simpler if you do it as the absolute first thing and you just focus on all this like culture stuff. From a just purely performance perspective, I would rather have a long weekend somewhere with no PCs than have a week somewhere where we play some games and the PCs are there all the time, because also that means people are thinking like, well, I could just like, why aren't I playing? Whereas if you don't even have that option, then it's not, I'm doing this talk rather than playing. It's like, I'm here anyway. So I've got to do it.
Yeah. Good point. And as long as it's set up in advance, people know what they're getting into, I think that's probably a great way of doing it. Should we move on to best ofs? So
Yeah, sure.
because it's an exciting part of the season for you.
Yeah. Well, I wanted to get your approach on this kind of thing in general. So
Okay.
in League of Legends, we have this strange situation where when the game starts, that's it from a coaching point of view. We're done. And that's very unique even among esports. So CS Valorant have the rounds. Rocket League always has breaks because the games are really short, all this kind of thing. Whereas League of Legends, a huge part of most people's careers are based on just best of ones, even if playoffs are the more important part in a series. But there's a lot of people who, don't make, like myself, I haven't made playoffs that much. I haven't done that many best ofs in my life, considering how long I've been coaching. I've done a lot, but not per year.
Right.
Yeah, it'd be like, well, 5 or 6 per year, that would be considered a lot for a lot of teams. But what do you, in sport, you have a lot more choice. So you have half times. I mean, basketball, you guys have timeouts as well. So what are the kind of things that you're thinking about when you come into let's say halftime talk rather than timeouts, because they're not universal for sport, but a halftime team talk? And if we can say, firstly, forgetting the Actually, no. I was going to say forgetting the physical side of things, but I do think energy in a best of series is really important as well. So, what are the things that you think a coach should think about coming into a halftime team talk? And firstly, is that a good analogy? So, what I was saying when I was doing like the co-stream is like, I'm not interested in what we did wrong in this game. What I'm interested in is what are the things that I would need to tell them for the next game in the best of. Like, what do I need to tell them about second half to make it so that we can do better in the second half? Not what are the mistakes we made in the first half, if that makes sense. So,
Yeah.
firstly, is that analogy good in terms of thinking about it in a halftime? And then, if it is, how do you actually approach? How would you advise someone approach halftime team talk or a best of team talk?
No one's ever asked me about this, and I've actually never spoken about it. But I coached to a pretty good level in basketball, and my halftime talks were treatment, team, and tactics. So treatment, I was at the level where we had some support staff, and some of the players would need to get things fixed or retaped. But it could also be they need to top up their water bottle. It could be they need to put some gel on somewhere, that kind of thing. So it was like, okay, immediately after the end of the half, let's get that done. Team was like, what's the lineup going into the third quarter or the second half if you're in the other game? And so it was like, I didn't want to have to. There's always a moment after the coach gives their like the meat of their talk that people start switching off and thinking, and you don't want them to have to bring them back in and be like, oh, by the way, you, and you are swapping in for you, and you're going out. So team was like, what's the lineup we're going out with? And tactics was, what are we changing? What are we focusing on? What are we emphasizing? What plays have we not run that we want to run more of? If I had video, sometimes I had video from the first half that I could actually play, and I could highlight like a specific situation that I wanted to change. So that was part of like that whole tactics talk. Or it was just purely motivational, and like if we're down close, it's firing them up. If we're down a lot, it's we haven't got much to lose. Let's go for it. That kind of stuff. And sometimes, of course, we were up. We had a decent record, so sometimes we were up, and it was like, let's keep going. The best one I ever gave though was we were up. I don't know if it was like we were smashing another team, but we were playing really well against a very good team. Came in at halftime. I let all the players go in first. They all sat down, and they were buzzing. You could hear it from outside. They were buzzing at how well it had gone. There was lots of like clapping and high fives. And then I walked in, and it was silence because they were expecting the long protracted team talk. And I think I said I walked in, and I was like pretty composed, and then I just unleashed a lot of excitement and energy, and I said something to the effect of like, "This is very good. Let's keep it up and keep rolling, and let's go." And then I just ran out, and they all cheered and followed me, and we ran out. And it was like something out of character for me because I wasn't like a hugely expressive, loud, emotional guy. But I think in the moment it was exactly what was needed, and that was something I look back at as quite a success. And for the players, I think not having the long, boring, like things are going well, let's not analyze. Let's just ride the wave. And I think that was like a really nice moment, and that's something I look back on really fondly. How it translates to league, I think I don't think I think you do have to you have to focus on team. Well, let's say treatment would be okay. Get your water, get up, have a walk, get the blood flowing a little bit. We know that's good for performance because of blood flow to the brain, cognitive function, that kind of stuff. Team would be, I guess, maybe it's draft, and of course you've got to think about that a little bit.
That might need to be last.
That might need to be last.
Yeah, you might need to sort those around.
And tactics, I mean, it's so dependent on draft sometimes, right? So is there something you can review in the scrim that's really going to be, is there a,
Yeah, I think you can still do tactics. I think that's still a good way to think about it. But it's just like, what big thing? Yeah, what big thing do you want to change, or what big thing do you want to keep the same? I think that's useful.
Yeah.
So for me, after our first game, it was a bit weird because we had a pause, and we were so far ahead that after the pause, we got very silly with it. So I just kind of ignored everything after that. I didn't even mention it. Because I think if we didn't pause, we would just finish quite cleanly. And instead, it was just there's a couple of moments where I disconnected in the early game. But other than that, it was good job I mean, basically that
Nice.
was it.
Yeah. Well, that's really important. If you can use the playbook for build, like, it's really great to feel confident in performance. And if you as a coach can use those moments to reinforce confidence, like, this has gone well, you did this really well. I'd like to see more of this. You can continue doing this, like that. Drop them in. That's brilliant. Fixing mistakes is like,
Yeah, you can't change what kind of team you are in the 10 minutes in between
no,
games when you got to do draft as well.
no.
So,
And I really don't like it when we push it. It's like we push it right up to the minute, and then it's like into draft, still thinking about.
yeah, and I think just what does your team need of any of those things, I think is really
Yeah.
useful. I think technically, maybe not technically, the most effective best of thing that we did once was we were in the final of, I forgot what it's even called, the King of the Hill round of Forge of Champions or something, when they were just experimenting with all these different formats. So it's a best of 5. I think it was the second one that we were in. We'd lost this first one, so we came second or something like that. And we went 2-0 up, and then it got back to 2-2. And before the 5th game, we went outside and meditated. We had something like a 15-minute break, and we did a 10-minute meditation session, and that was it. That was all we did. And that was the thing that then we won. And I think we wouldn't have won if we'd have done something else. So
Overloaded with information, for
yeah,
example.
sometimes the assessment there from me and Josh, the other coach, was we don't need to do anything differently. We need to play how we play. So how do we get back to that?
Yeah.
And actually, I was there as a video person, but I should have done the same thing with Excel a few years later. I felt really bad about not doing it, but I didn't want to like overstep or anything like that. But I think I should have just taken the coach aside and said, like, can I just do this? Like, just to do a mindfulness exercise, because you just need to go back to like where we were in a much better state. We're in a much better position, but we just got so much in our own heads, and spend another 10 minutes just arguing about draft or talking about parts from the game or discussing how that dive went or anything like that. Just forget all that. Start from the beginning again.
This is such a huge point about coaching, is that if you create dependency in training, that's what happens in performance. And so what I mean by dependency is, if you train where you have, after every scrim game as a coach, you dominate the airwaves, and then you play in an official, you're creating dependency where players expect you to dominate the airwaves, and it's almost weird if you don't, even if you're doing it to try and give space to other people. So I think mix up your approaches in scrims so that players feel, okay, sometimes it's things are going well, I can step up and say something, or I can say something that's not maybe game specifically related, maybe it's more emotional or motivational.
Yeah.
And exactly as you say, like, if you never ever give the team that alternative, like that moment, those few minutes of like, let's do a breathing exercise, for example. If you never do that and you spring it on them in game,
Yeah, of course. It
can
was
be rough.
because it was something that we'd started to do before every
Perfect.
scrim and before every, and a player who, just one of the players suggested, like, can we just go and do this? And so instead we did it the
Amazing.
whole time. And then like one of us quietly went up and prepped the last draft while we were all just sitting outside. But that actually, what you just said made me suddenly think, creating dependencies, because we scrim in that same way, where we play a scrim, then we have 20 minutes in between, then we play the next game. And in those 20 minutes, we look at the game and we say all the things we did wrong. And hopefully some of the things we did right as well, but mostly what we did wrong. We're creating that dependency already. So then you come out of the first game of a best of 5 and you want to look at the dragon play again. But it's not happening in this series. Like, you're not fundamentally changing how you approach dragons by looking at one dragon play. And then even if you did, it's not going to be the same in the next game. I mean, in Fearless now, it cannot be the same. You can't have the same champions anymore.
Right.
So is that actually, is that actually a problem? Should we do some scrims where we just play a bunch of games and don't talk in between? And then, I mean, I would love to if we could, but we can't.
I think you have to accept that you are going to need some game talk. But I think it's just like play around with the level of it and
Mm.
who leads it and what. So maybe I understand after watching a game as from the perspective of the coach, you've watched 45 minutes of play that you want to say a lot, but maybe there are times during the week of training where it's just you just say this just this one thing, and then the floor is yours. And I think we could do that every night. We can use that as a tool. Like it's just a
Mm.
different variation of it. But all I'm saying is it's just like don't build a team where it's unusual if you don't dominate the airwaves, because then when things are going well in a competitive situation and you have to fill 15 minutes of chat, even though
Mm.
you're actually pretty
Mm.
happy with things, it could be detrimental. I think that's what I'm
Yeah.
getting at.
Okay. There's a lot of things to think about, but yeah, as a structure, some form of like physical reset, like the things you
Yeah,
need, go to the toilet, all that kind of stuff.
exactly.
Some talk on draft, which probably will be coming into the next game, but you could split them both up. If there's stuff to learn from that last draft, maybe we talk about that first while
Hmm.
everyone's freshest, because those are the biggest difference makers, to be honest.
Yeah,
Okay, we need to make sure we have more engaged next time. All right.
yeah.
That's actually a much bigger difference maker than anything else you could say in between a game. Then, like tactics. But for me, again, it's always just like, what's like the one thing to remember? We've been doing the same with scouting. So this week, our scouting coach, Kiao, he had like, this is the one thing. There was a bunch of little videos, but we still had, there was one that was clearly the most important, which was that they have very sloppy, like objective setup sometimes. I forgot we're streaming. Sometimes they have sloppy objective setups, and they will be caught out if we have enough tools. So that's why we draft a bunch of engage tools always. And
Great.
I think you do the same thing in between a game. Like, what's the one thing you want the team to take into the next game?
Yeah, reinforce, reinforce. Absolutely. Yeah, it's not the time to make huge changes. It's not the time to take something off the shelf that the players aren't expecting, I think.
Yeah,
So,
yeah,
and also
exactly.
it might not, you have to, this is the complexity of coaching, right? You have those moments, you have to decide what does a team need, like you said. It could be purely emotional, it could be purely motivational, it could be a soft tone, it could be a driver, you know? So
Sometimes someone just needs to slam the table.
exactly that, yeah. And that's part of the tactic thing. It's actually the tactics you use as well. So
Mm,
yeah. But I mean I didn't I, well, I wasn't coaching in like the NBA or anything. So I do know it gets much more complex the more you have coaching staff, because you also need to make time to maybe get their thoughts as well. So
mm,
maybe during that treatment section, if players take 2 minutes,
mm.
that's when you check in with other coaches somewhere on a different call. But it gets very complicated on remote teams, right? Like what channel are
Yeah,
you in?
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. I think during the game is the best thing for esports to talk amongst the
Right.
coaches if you have the opportunity to, but sometimes you don't. So,
I've never been able to do that. Like I've worked with teams in remote teams where the staff are in like TeamSpeak.
mm,
In scrims, we're listening to the player's voice as
okay,
well, and they're
right.
having the conversation. I can't do that. So
Yeah, yeah. I can't do it very well either.
yeah. So anyway, but you're in. I mean, you're in. How are you experiencing it? Like, is it good fun, or is it
Yeah, yeah, yeah. It was
nerve-wracking?
fun.
Are you finding the right words?
Yeah, started yesterday. I think it was. Uh, I think our group is much stronger as we've seen. Our group has won every game, so it was a little bit easier competition. And then we have a week off, and then we play against a team that we played already in the groups, but they look much better. They looked much better
Hmm.
this week. That's always partly due to the strength of competition, but it's still a difficult one. And then yeah, we don't play next week, and then we play potentially two times the week after in a best of three, and then the next day in a best of five, which could be fun. And if we win the first one, so it doesn't matter who wins the best of five, we would have another week off, and then we'd be in the final as well. So only a month away. It's all very condensed and short, but we
Yeah.
play hopefully against Casual's team on in a best of five, and then hopefully again on the when they can try and get revenge for us beating them in the upper bracket. Hopefully in the final weekend.
Fantastic. Yeah, I've been looking at the schedule. So Nord Bulldogs with Coach Kybit. Shout out to Coach Kybit. Um, Yeah, how exciting! I'm so happy the NLC is alive and kicking.
Alive and kicking.
Yeah,
Yeah. Great. Well,
awesome.
we'll call it there for this episode. Thank you very much for people who are sticking around, especially who sticked around through all that technical difficulties. For the VOD, I've decided what I'm going to do. I'm going to do it in a bit of a weird way. So I'm going to put the section where we're both talking first, and then
Mhm.
I'm going to put the section where just I'm talking later. So if you're watching the VOD, if you want to look at what me talking to myself for the next hour, you're more than welcome to. We didn't kind of cover everything that we went over, but we did try and touch on some of the same topics. But yeah, I'm going to be not streaming tomorrow. So thanks very much for coming. And if you're around for the stream often, I'll see you again on Sunday. But if not, next week on Friday for another episode with both of us talking this time.
Awesome. Great stuff. Thanks, John. Have a great weekend, everyone.
And we're live. Welcome to the Coach Support Show, where science meets strategy. And what are we talking about this week, Watson? Yeah, sure. So what we did was based in Munich. We were there for about a week. So travel day was Monday, and people flying in from all over Europe, or training, actually. One person trained from north of Germany instead. And then we were there all the way till the following Sunday. So basically a full week. We had our competitive games as well. We had scrims, and we also had time to do a few other things, and then the media day as well. So, in terms of what a boot camp should be to achieve and all that kind of thing, I mean, we can get into that. But ours was very different from how I've experienced them in the past. I think there was some things about it that were much better and some things about it that were much worse than ones that I've experienced in the past. So happy to get into all of that, but that's just the kind of simple thing of what we actually did, which was to go to boot camp, to go to Munich, to go see each other for the first time together. And it was at a Red Bull facility. And yeah, that's kind of the brief overview. Yeah, I mean, a lot of organization goes into it. A lot of money goes into it as well. So we were lucky enough to have sponsors and Mad Gaming, big partner of it, but also Red Bull for giving us the facility and other sponsors as well. Yeah, I think this is the thing. The normal approach to boot camps in LoL esports, especially, I don't actually really agree with in terms of remote teams. So there's two things that teams like to do. They like to come together at the beginning, and they like to come together coming into playoffs or something like that. Now, I think coming together for playoffs is a ridiculous idea, and I think that it's not worth doing in general. And coming together at the beginning is absolutely fantastic, but I would maybe do it in a slightly different way. And this is as someone who's spent a lot of time doing like full splits, for example, all in person, all in a gaming house with like low money, making it do kind of thing. And I think there's a lot of teams at the moment who maybe haven't had that experience and therefore have slightly the wrong impression. So I can just get into what I think boot camps should be, if that's an easier way to do it, and then we can take apart this one, because also it's definitely worth saying right at the top, when I'm talking now about boot camps, I'm talking about like theoretical, ignore everything else. This is what I would do for performance, but the real world unfortunately doesn't always let us do those kind of things. So from my point of view, when you're online, if you think about the processes that a team goes through, we have practice, reviews, we have discussions about the game, we have any kind of cultural discussions, we have getting to know each other, building that connection, all those kind of things. Now, the way people plan boot camps and the way people act makes it seem to me as though most people think that scrimming together from the same place or playing together from the same place is super good and the reason that you would go together. From my point of view, that's the worst part about the boot camp. I think that scrimming from the same room is slightly better than scrimming from different places for each game, but not necessarily for a few short days. You're in a new place, you've got a new setup, even if you bring your own keyboard and mouse and everything, you're going to have to get used to that area. You probably don't have all the like comforts that you have in your own house, either comforts like literally or comforts. For me, I've got, we talked about it last time, like a chin up bar or something like that. Like that's a really useful thing for me to survive scrims and keep focused throughout scrims. And suddenly that's all gone. And whatever other comforts you have, like your own bed, your own pillow, your own routines, your own gym, all that kind of stuff is all gone as well. And so for these long periods of sustained high focus, it can really start to stack up. What we always used to say when you were doing things in a gaming house is when you come to a gaming house, you've got to bear in mind that for the first week or two, you're going to be far worse than if you'd have not gone to a gaming house. And then by the end, you're going to overtake that position you were. And so when people book boot camps for the week of playoffs or something like that, I think you're just flipping a coin. The chances that someone, it's not even flipping a coin, it's a weighted coin, weighted against you. The chances that someone has some problem that really impacts performance, doesn't like the food in the new country, or can't sleep well in the new bed for no real reason that they can point to, they just can't. Or they don't like the new setup, and you're also going to have to learn the new setup. Like there's so many reasons why your performance might be worse. And the upside for me is just very little. The upside is that we can all sit around a TV probably and talk about the game rather than sit around your own screen and look at Discord and talk about the game. So for me, the upside of that is kind of very little. I think that if you're there the whole time, I'd rather be scrimming in person. But if it's just for a week, I think scrims in person add 5-10%, but they actually have the chance to reduce as well. So we had that problem because our scrims in person were not very good, because everyone was very tired and getting more and more tired as we did more and more scrims and getting used to the setup and everything like that. Our big problem is that if you're going to do a bootcamp without scrims, you can't do it in the middle of the season because you can't just not practice for a week. That's definitely worse than getting slightly suboptimal practice. So there's all those things to balance too. For LEC, it's still the regular season. For NLC, we're in the playoffs now, but we weren't during the boot camp. And they technically, I mean, it's all very strange. The NLC it's a really interesting format, but it wasn't groups into playoffs because it was just seeding. So no one gets knocked out. So basically it's, we really want to do best ofs, which I love, but we don't want to just throw people in blind. We want to work out where you should place first. So I think it was a really good format actually for the NLC, but that's a different point. So we're coming into playoffs now. It was the last week of our regular season. It has to happen now. It has to happen now for a lot of practical reasons, and there's no other way around it. We didn't have time before we started. So if I just take through what I would want ideally from a boot camp, if it was a remote team, it would be the first thing that we do, which I think is very important. Like before even a single scrim online, ideally, we'd get together. And the main goal for me is getting on the same page. But it is exactly what you talk about, is the group cohesion aspect of things. So I would start before the players even arrive with a staff boot camp and try and get us all on the same page first. But I have a series of exercises that I do, or a load of exercises that fall into a specific series, and we do as much as we can of each one, where it's some sort of, I mean, I call them looking in, looking out, looking around, and looking ahead. But it's basically exercises about self-reflection, then exercises or some time dedicated to learning about the organization. So that's like out of our room into the wider organization. Then around the room, as in learning about each other. And then looking ahead is like planning for the future. And again, the goal is we're trying to get everyone on the same page. So we do all those exercises about the out of game stuff. And then I would have a lot of discussion around the game. Now, for anyone who's following the Nord content, you've seen I've done quite a lot of sort of philosophical discussion about the game, and it's quite tough and it's quite hard, especially when we're balancing it on the stream as well. Like we don't want the discussion to just keep going round and round in circles because it's really boring to watch. So having those discussions first, I think would be really useful. Like what kind of team do we want to be? Like how do we want to play, and those kind of things. But the main part for me is all this other stuff that's got nothing to do with the game. And the reason that I want to do it at the beginning is because I want to make sure that whatever way we behave from the beginning, like we're setting those habits consciously, rather than if you're doing it after 2 weeks of scrims and then you come together, then those 2 weeks of scrims have a massive dictate into how you actually behave together, rather than like, let's start, this is how we're going to do it. And then from the very beginning, you can just be very specific on those things. So I can go into each of those areas in more detail and explain the stuff that we could do or have done, sorry, and can explain the stuff that we were able to do during the bootcamp, which was very, very, very little of it. But those are the kind of, yeah, looking ahead, just, in, out, around, ahead. In whatever order. Normally I start with looking around stuff, but in an ideal world, if we had like maybe not a full week of doing stuff without the game, but maybe let's say, fine, if we had a full week, then I would probably not just do all of one and then all of another and all of another and all of another. I would kind of mix them up and mix them day by day. Yeah, it's really important as well when you're talking about in-game stuff too. So definitely true for everybody, but also the in-game stuff really, we need to be pulling in the same direction around the game. And that's actually a lot more difficult than people think. And so you can quite easily be giving advice that counteracts other advice, whether you like know it or not. And I won't say which team, but one of the best teams in Europe, in their behind the scenes video, they were going into a game and one of the coaches is talking about being really careful and the other coach is talking about being really aggressive. And it's even these things of like, okay, you're literally now, this was near the end of the year, you've been working together for a year, and at this point you're literally giving completely opposite information to the players. And that's the kind of thing that from the very beginning, like we need to know what we're doing, because if I have to judge every situation as to make sure I'm not going too aggressive, I'm not going to take the opportunities that I need to take. So they're both phrased in a very positive way. Like, let's make sure we don't miss any opportunities. It wasn't exactly this, so I'm moving away from that. But you can hopefully picture the example. If one coach says, let's not miss any opportunities, and the other coach says, I don't know, remember to play disciplined and not get caught out. Those both sound good. But if you think about them together, that's literally the opposite advice. You can't be seizing every opportunity and also judging every opportunity with the best knowledge and taking time to judge it. So that's even literally been happening for a year working together. So from the very beginning, understanding what kind of team we want to be. Do we want to be pushing these players to be even like that, more aggressive, more aggressive, more aggressive? That means we need to not be talking about the times where they go too aggressive. We need to instead be thinking about, okay, what did you see here? Or if you did this, would it go better? Like, rather than this is a mistake to go for this. And trying to work out all those things. And then literally, let's agree on the game. Let's agree on some processes around the game. How does it actually work? What actually are the systems that are the most important and how do they function? And those kind of things as well for a staff bootcamp, I think are crucial. Thanks. Well, we can go through these different sections in these different buckets. So first one for me is looking around, is what I call it. I think the looking things are easier to remember, but it maybe doesn't make quite as much sense. But what I'm imagining is we're in a ring in this room and it's looking around the circle, right? So learning about your teammates is the idea. For me, this is a really big one. And basically, each time I do it, I then put more time into it next time. And every time I put more time into it, every time I make it a bigger deal, a bigger part of the process, it just goes, I don't regret it at all. Like, I just want to do more and more and more. I think it's so important and so impactful. I don't believe that we have to be friends, but absolutely connection is vital, and it's a cornerstone of high performance. And one of the coaches who I'm getting very into at the moment, or have been into for quite a while, is Razzie Erasmus for South African rugby. And in the documentary that they have about them behind the scenes, he's talking about going into the World Cup final. Even his speech is something like, they don't know what we know, and about like the experiences that we've shared and the experiences that we've had coming from South Africa, and coming from so many of these players have like such a unbelievably tough life and those kind of things. And even Sia Khaleesi, when they won the first time, I saw an interview with him, and they said at halftime, were you worried? Because they were just ahead of England, unfortunately, just ahead, but it could have really gone either way. And he said, no, because I could look around the room and I knew exactly why every person was there, and I knew they knew why I was there. Now, of course, that's nice because you could have that and still lose, but I think it's just so important. So exercises about looking around and like learning about each other, I think these ones are the most crucial. And this was the thing that, coming into this boot camp, I was saying, okay, if we go and do one thing, we're going to do stuff on that. And yeah, and the thing for me is, it's not necessarily just that he trusts his teammates can do it, kind of thing. The first thing he talked about was not, I looked around the room and I saw that these are all fantastic players and the best in the world. It's, I knew them well enough to know why they were here and what they were really fighting for. And I knew they knew the same thing about me. And I think that's a really impactful, even way to think about it. So it's not that doing these exercises builds, well, it is actually, it does build more trust, but the main goal for it, for me, is not about building more trust. It's about really understanding where people come from, because so much of our behavior is obviously just what's happened in the past. And so really getting to the bottom of that, I think, is really crucial and important. And the exercise that I do here is very simple. It's just an interview, but it has a lot of proper deep questions. And I try and encourage as much as possible for people to be absolutely as open as possible. So we do an exercise that I stole from England football, which is hero, highlight, and hardship. So a hero from your life, a highlight of your life, and a hardship of your life. And I get myself interviewed first, because this is always the best way to, if you want something in the culture, I always tell coaches that I work with, you have to live it to 11. I don't know if this is Spinal Tap reference works, but anyway, you have to like show it more. If you want everyone to be on time, you have to be early, and if you want everyone to be open, you have to be like more open first. So I had this time Victor, our head of esports, interview me and ask those questions, and obviously I had more time to think about it because I knew they were coming, but I was just straight up from the very beginning, just entirely open and honest about it. And then obviously I can't force the players to reciprocate, but I do, and I don't want them to share something they're not comfortable with. But we really want to build that space where, just in our tight little circle, as few people there as possible, to be quite honest. Everyone wants to hear this from the players, and all the support staff would want to be there. But in an ideal world, it would just be like me and the players, so it can be as open as possible. We obviously are streaming everything, but there was no streaming this, there was no recording this, there was pictures but no sound, so people could really feel comfortable being open about it. And yeah, I think it was so good, and I did it in, like I said, I did it in a more intense way than I did it at Slari, for example, more intense way than I've advised people to do it since. And I would, next team, do it like this, or even more so. Like, it's some of the most valuable time that you can do if you're in a boot camp, or even not. Like, some of the most valuable time you can do in your first week. No, that's perfect. That's perfect. So yeah, that's for me the main thing of looking around. So what we do is, I started with an exercise that I stole from Callum, actually, which is to bring an important item to you and bring it to the to the venue. So we started with that. So already I wanted it to start with something that's doesn't need to be super serious, but like let's set the tone straight away. I don't want to start with silly questions, even if we can end up with some silly questions. So for me, it's my wedding ring, which is now an easy out. I always have it with me. And strangely, of the 6 of us, 5 players and me, half of us could have a wedding ring as our as our most important thing, which might be the first League of Legends team that I've been on that's the case. But anyway, so we start with that, and then we go through questions about your life. So where you're from, family, how did you find school, all those kind of things. So a lot of detail, and these are long interviews that take as long as they need, basically. But I think I like to talk, so my one was, I think, maybe over an hour. So we cover everything like that: family life, growing up, all those kind of things. Then we do the esports part, and then we do this hero hardship highlight part. Actually, sorry, before then, we do where you are now. So your, real life history, your esports history, and where you are now currently. Obviously a bit different if you're all in a team that is based somewhere rather than doing it in a boot camp. That's a slightly less relevant section, although not really. So I will talk about my wife, or you talk about your relationship, all those kind of things, where you met, how long you've been together, everything like that. And then we end with this hero hardship highlight thing. And the idea is, hopefully by that point, firstly, you probably touched on a bunch of these things, but also you're feeling comfortable enough to actually answer those as deeply as possible, really. And then we do end with some slightly more funnier, quick fire ones of like, what's your favorite movie? What's your favorite TV show? Do you like books? If so, what's your favorite book? Those kind of things, just in case everyone has the same one. Or we're going to make a playlist of everyone's favorite music at some point, which we can either have playing during scrims or something. Oh, we can't because we're streaming, but we would have playing during scrims if it weren't for the copyright strikes. Yeah, so that's the interview. That's actually the only exercise I do at the moment for this looking around one, because it covers everything, and I think that's something to do right from the beginning. And it also ties into, I said to the guys on the first day, I was talking about punctuality, I was talking about openness, I was talking about honesty. And one thing to really be aware of for any coaches listening is you don't know the experiences people have when, what they're bringing. And a lot of times when people behave in ways that you wouldn't want them to do, it's just because of, I would say esports PTSD, but I'm sure the same applies to any place that you're working in. So, for example, I've now had multiple players who weren't open and honest with me about feedback about stuff that was happening. And when we actually had that difficult conversation sometimes about it, they were like, well, it's because every coach I've worked with tells me to be open and honest. And then when I actually am open and honest, I'm like punished for it. So this is another good exercise to kind of just not talk about it, but show that like openness that we're going to have for each other. And the fact that in this tight little circle, you can really be yourself. And this is a good way to kind of start with that. Yeah, as I say, this is the one that we were able to do. We actually haven't finished them all, so we're going to have to unfortunately do some of them online, because they took a long time. But I was just so impressed with the players and how they engaged with it. They took the exact right approach to it. They were just completely like super open about everything, and you could see it just shift the dynamic completely, which was fantastic, because there were some things that were a little bit not going so well about the bootcamp because it was very difficult to organize. There was far more plates in the air than normal because the stream, and because the stream being a job and all this kind of thing makes it so much more complicated than it otherwise would be. And so there was a lot of like wasted time. There was a lot of things that weren't that efficient and all that kind of stuff. And then we did the first interview with me, and even straight after that, people were like, okay, like sort of understanding, I get it now. I was kind of thinking this would be another thing that would be a bit of a waste of time. And then we did some with some of the players, and it just I thought it was just really special, and I think everyone thought the same. And so we didn't manage to get them all done, but yeah, it worked really, really well. So we'll definitely continue to do that going forward. And even this, I don't think works properly in a sports team. So I've stolen ideas from it from sports teams, like this hero hardship highlight thing. But when you've got 50 people in a squad or 30 people in a squad, you don't have time to have an hour and a bit interview with everyone. But there's 6 of us, so we actually do have time to do it this way, in this like really, really deep way. And it's really, it can be fun as well, like hearing about everyone's esports history as well. And especially with these guys who've been playing for absolutely forever. It was like, okay, Lucas is playing Tamas at San Jose IEM in 2012 or something, and all this kind of thing. But then also other players that they've all interacted with, and someone mentions a player and there's an instant response from the other side of the room, and they share a good moment about the difficulties or pleasures of working with that person. So yeah, no, it worked really well. And I think, like I say, that's the only thing I do in terms of the looking around stuff, because it's I think just covers everything. It's like the best. Looking ahead is the big one. It's probably easier to talk about that at the end. And this is the only one that I actually do fully at the end. So looking around, I do think is best to do at the beginning, because it sets the stage for everything else, and also will make everything else easier because you build up that connection. But that doesn't necessarily mean it has to be done all on the first day, because doing them back to back to back to back to back is very tiring. But it could be done. Then the looking ahead is like the planning for the future, and like I say, it is based on everything that's come before. So that one kind of does need to be at the end. So while I say there's no definite order of like day 1, day 2, day 3, I do think that's your start and end point. So the other one, I guess, or the other ones to talk about would be looking in and looking out. Looking out for me is important that was the one that comes from the organization mostly, because I'm also in the player's position oftentimes. And it's about building up a relationship with the organization for real, which is really uncommon in esports. There's probably only 1 or 2 places where people want to go for the organization. Places like KC, for example, bring that, even when it used to be places like Fnatic, but now I think it's hard to distinguish. Or even G2. Do you want to go because it's G2, or you want to go because it's on with those players? You know, if those players went somewhere else, wouldn't you just want to go with them rather than with the organization? Which of course does happen to some extent everywhere, but this sort of pride in the badge type idea, I think, is really, really underutilized in esports, even from a performance point of view. It's obviously better for all the other reasons. But before, a lot of teams thought about it almost as like, okay, it's better for all the other reasons. It's better for the media and all that kind of stuff. And we take time out of the performance to do it. But from my point of view, it's the opposite. It's like it's both pulling in the same direction. So teams with large fan bases, for example, I was really trying to make a lot of fan meetups happen on Solari, but we weren't able to do that. They have started doing them since, and they've gone exactly as you would hope. And it's been really useful for the players to see like the people who are actually supporting them, and see in a way like why you're doing it, you know, or who you're doing it for, regardless of whether that's something you conceptualize or not. It's so different, you know. You can see 200 people like your tweet, but seeing 200 people in a room cheering for you and asking autographs and stuff like that, that's quite something. That's quite different. It's quite a different experience. And so these kind of exercises from the organization, I think, is really useful, but also just the practicality of like how an organization actually works, and also anything else that the organization can kind of bring to the players as well. I think all these fall into that looking out. So it's like looking out of our room into the wider organization. Yeah. One person came. Well, so that I guess sort of answers the question as well. It's difficult. It's difficult to make something like this happen from my point of view. I think what I failed at doing in the past, and what I failed at doing at Solari, and even here, I think, is the communication of what I'm really thinking and why it's important and all that kind of stuff. Because there's no organization who is in this because they really hate esports, but it's just great money. Like that's not that's not really it's not as a spoiler. But even if it was, I think you probably wouldn't get that many people. So it's all based on what people have gradually been sort of taught by the behavior of those around them. And so we have taught people as coaches for years that we want to be like left alone, and we complain about any like media commitments and any time not spent doing the thing that we wanted to do, and all this stuff of like doing stuff for the fans and all that kind of thing is just always like it's a minus. That's an hour that I can't scrim, or that's an hour that I can't. And so people have gradually distanced themselves, and I think if you really communicated it properly and seriously enough, I think it could have been much, much better. I was focused too much on, I was talking to people at Solari, for example, we'll use that as an example, but even before, I was focused too much on getting them to, I don't know, give a presentation about how the partnership side of the business works. And now suddenly they have to do work to build that presentation and all this kind of thing. Whereas instead it's like, look, just come and chat, and just to get to know them, but just to explain who you are, why what you do lets them do what they do, and those kind of things. But also just with enough warning. I think all of those would have been better ways to do it. But this is the one area that can't come from me, because even if I've been at the organization for a while, I'm like in between the organization and the team. So we need people from the actual organization to explain the different areas of it. I also think it's really worth going through your organization and seeing anyone who's got any like useful, interesting skill and teaching players about that. So I wanted people from Solari to come and talk about streaming and things like that, but couldn't even really make that work, or how to be entertaining on camera, or those kind of things. But if you've got someone who does all your video editing, you never know. It could be a useful thing to know. People who do social media, players can obviously have just as much chance coming up with something hilarious as anyone else to go out on Twitter. So, why not build that connection for all those reasons? And it can be all manner of things, I won't say which, although of course I think it's obvious which kind of orgs might have to deal with this, but there's also the sort of more serious like HR type things, which are also worth doing. So certain organizations, you're going to have young players joining who are now going to have thousands of people looking to them, and young men joining, and thousands of those people looking at them are going to be women as well, and talking about that whole aspect of things, and how this what's appropriate, what's not appropriate, but also just like you're going to have to get used to being spammed with things that you wouldn't think that you would have to be used to as a gamer. But all those kind of that kind of side of stuff as well, I think is really important to show that the organization is there and really can be there to support them. But also, like I say, that's the reason that any organization is doing esports, is because they love esports and esports players, and they want to be close to them. And it's just the distance has been, it's like neither side. When it was me, for example, I was very distant with Solari or previous teams, and I think actually neither side wanted it, but both sides assumed the other one wanted it. so it was just this really messy situation. And afterwards I was just thinking, over the last few years, like, why did I behave like that? That's just crazy. And all their behavior makes sense now with that in mind. And so it's just one of those things to nip in the bud really early on with these exercises of, okay, this is where we are. Let's try and build into the players some sort of pride in the jersey, and the idea that they're actually part of something that's bigger than them, and bigger than the team, and bigger than the team and the coaching staff. And this whole enterprise is just a big functioning machine. And the other thing is that we see over and over again that being near high performers makes you perform better. It doesn't matter if you're in the same role or not. So if your content team is absolutely killing it, and they're interacting a lot with your league team, that's just going to be good for everybody. If they're working hard, they're in the office on time, early, doing all this great work, then show it, don't hide it. Yeah. Well, so that's looking out. That's the area of that. Then the last one before we get to looking ahead is looking in, and this is just like self-reflection exercises. So for me, what I'm looking to do is get people as used to or some practice in, not as used to as possible, but like at least some practice in reflection. So we talked about reflection, of course, a lot last week, and things like that are very useful. Now, what I would also do here is introduce some sort of mental model with the team, or like a shared way of talking about that kind of aspect of things. Now, in an ideal world, it wouldn't be me doing this. I'd have someone who's qualified to come in and do it, someone who's going to be working with the team. But for example, I really like the red head, blue head thing, Dr. Kerry Evans that did with the All Blacks. I think that works really well for league. I think that's really useful for a bunch of reasons. But it's also another one I've used, which I did with Solari, is the chimping thing, Dr. Stephen Peterson or Peters, who was working with Team Sky. So those kind of things of building some way of talking about the stuff that we're gonna face, and building some way of recognizing it when it's in yourself, it's like tilt or whatever it might be, but then also just getting used to reflection and getting used to thinking about things deeply. So another speech that I really love is "This is Water" by David Foster Wallace, which I would probably play to teams. It really depends on the English fluency level of people, because he's a writer. He's a very pithy writer. He just makes up words all the time in his books. He's the guy who wrote Infinite Jest, if everyone's heard of that book, because that's one of those like challenge to read Infinite Jest kind of books. And it's a fantastic speech, but it's very impenetrable in places. So it's not always appropriate. But again, it's about a sort of self-reflection and being aware of your own thought patterns and that kind of idea. And just being able to have the power to choose what to think, rather than just let yourself be run by your instant reactions to things. So it's all those kind of exercises. And like I say, in an ideal world, it would be me working with someone who is going to be in charge and responsible of that side of our performance. And so working with them on, whatever their preferred way of discussing it with players is, if they have something different than this red head, blue head type idea. So that's the looking in exercises. Obviously, we can talk about any of what I've just said more if you want. Happy to give more or discussion on any part of that. So Redhead, Bluehead, let me find the name of the book, because it's not called Redhead, Bluehead. It's called... Maybe it is, actually. No, it's called Perform Under Pressure, the book. By a guy called Dr. Kerry Evans, who worked with the All Blacks. So they were kind of famous chokers in a way, because they got knocked out at like semi-finals and quarterfinals of World Cups, but they were the best team in the world for so long. They were the number one ranked team all the way up to the World Cup. Then they lost in the quarters. Then the number one ranked team all the way up to World Cup, and they lost in the semis. And then they won back to back after that. And the very, very simple thing about it is, when you're in the red, it's when you're not in the moment, you're thinking about the past, or you're thinking about the future. And when you're in the blue, it's when you're like mindful, you're thinking about the present, all that kind of thing. So actually, let me get it up. Yeah, so the things that I really like about it is that, and in terms of the way I present this to the team, because it's something like this, there's like videos of Dan Carter talking about it, Richard McCaw talking about it. So you can have a bunch of different athletes talking about it, rather than the doctor presenting it to you kind of thing, which is always useful. The things that I really like about it is that they are very clear to identify that in Redhead, you've got multiple different responses that you can take. So the main ones being fight, flight, or freeze. And you have one of those you're more likely to go into. And this is part of the self-reflection exercise of like, okay, let's think about it for yourself. and take some time and see which you think is your biggest thing. And the basic thing that I really love is that we have to understand that it's not a mistake to go into red. It's going to happen every single game. It's unavoidable. But it's a mistake if we as a team don't get you out. And that's the part that I really like. So the example that Dan Carter uses in his book, which is also fantastic, and a shorter version of it if you want to see that. If you check out the mind management chapter of The Art of Winning instead. I can't remember what player, but he's like, okay, if I've got a player who I know he's most likely to go into fight, which the League of Legends equivalent is people who they just get more and more aggressive. Basically, they think they need to just do like more and more plays. Obviously, in rugby, going into fight is a bit more direct of a thing that you can actually do. And he said, okay, like for him, I needed to tell him the plan. Like, this is how we're going to take control of this game. This is how we're going to win, because it's coming from a place of being unsure of what is going to happen and feeling like, oh, we're not progressing this game in the way that I want. Therefore, you start to get a bit more antsy, and then it just keeps spiraling. But then there might be another player who is more likely to go into like flight, and they sort of shut down and they just want to get out. And they almost like, you wouldn't ever admit this until afterwards or a long time afterwards, but it's like you almost want to be injured, or you want to just like get off the field in some way. Or in a best of series, for example, in League of Legends, you just want the game to be over. Like you're like 5k down, you're just like, I just want to lose. Like I just want it to stop. And that's firstly something to understand, that that's a real response that people can have. And secondly, that kind of person doesn't want to just be told the plan, because it's just going to it's not going to have much impact. They instead want it to be drawn out of them. So with this player, I asked them a bunch of questions, and they then have to explain what's going on to me. And that's a much better way of getting them to come back into the game, that kind of thing. So it's all these sort of things, and this kind of approach of stuff that you can do, but also a way to talk about it. And so, for example, Dan Carter has this thing where he talks about, he had a thing of next job. That was his way of doing it. And then also a physical stimulus. So before taking a kick, he would often push his boot into the ground, and he's like just trying to feel like the pressure back on his toes, or like giving himself a little kick in the shin as he's walking over to the ruck, for example, just like get his mind out and just like feel where he feels it, and that kind of thing. So it's all these they're all these tactics that are kind of not universal, but you go across them in different ways. So the chimping one that I've done before also has similar sort of ideas. But the thing that I personally really like about this redhead bluehead thing is that it's all about, it also has that layer of identifying your version of Tilted is different from my version of Tilted, but also we as a team have to get you out, and it's something that's always going to happen. There's no way you can go through a game being entirely zen, mindful in the moment. You'll miss a cannon minion and you're like, oh, I missed that cannon minion. I would have been able to get an item on the next wave, but now I have to wait for one more wave, and now I'm going to be completely off time. And it's just like, no, like how do you get back to that moment and just think, right, yeah, what is the next thing that we need to do? What's the next thing I need to think about, and not keep dwelling on the past. And I was trying to work out why. No, it's not. But we actually can't hear you. So I have been talking by myself for this whole time. But I don't understand, because you are coming through on OBS. If you talk. The wonders of... Okay, now try again.
Testing, testing, testing.
Nothing has happened on OBS.
Interesting.
This was like the one time where I'm not looking at chat. It's called me, and so I was like, "Why am I being called?" I told them I was doing a podcast, and now, okay, working now. Oh my goodness. Well,
no worries. I mean, if for what it's worth, I was saying absolute wisdom.
Yeah,
and
just the most useful piece of information ever. Well, that was an interesting one. The
Well,
monologue is quite
r
long.
major
Okay.
respect for everyone that stayed with us then.
Yeah, thank you very much if you stuck around for this. Um,
Yeah, nice.
this is why you should have producers on your shows, because I didn't want to be reading chat so that I would be more engaged in the conversation. And instead, I'm just talking to myself.
Hilarious.
Well, the VOD's going to be scuffed as well.
Do you think will it have been caught in the VOD if OBS was working? Like,
Well, OBS is doing both things, so no.
ah,
So what I just muted it and unmuted it, and then I changed the device back and forward. But even when I hadn't done any of that, it was still showing the bars of you talking.
hmm.
So
Somewhere
yeah,
out there is maybe my audio, but anyway, well,
probably not. This is where I tell you also, actually, I'm only broadcasting myself, and like this is not really a
hilarious.
podcast. I just want to talk.
You're probably not even talking to me. You're asking questions. You're
No.
responding to questions from
Yeah,
someone else.
yeah. And is
Hilarious.
Watson in the room with us now?
Yeah, exactly.